Hello everyone, thanks for joining me. I'm just going to give a quick overview of Bake. Bake is a replacement for Rake. If you've ever used Rake, it's a great tool. It's used everywhere in Ruby, um, but it's also a tool which has a lot of features which aren't particularly useful for the most typical use cases. So after finding some frustrations, for example, with Rake, you end up loading all of your code essentially to execute just one task. Argument handling with Rake is it's tricky at best, and I guess Rake is more focused on dependency resolution by executing tasks, whereas Bake is more just focused on task execution. So they can work side by side. You can use Rake and Bake in the same project, and they're both good. So I'm going to give a quick demo of Bake and how you might like to use it. So I've got the Bake gem here, which I'm just going to get out of the way for now, and we are going to just pretend we're creating a new project called Bakery. So we'll create our gem file. And we're going to chuck in the Bake gem. So we just change into the bakery directory. We're going to go bundle install. Excellent. So now we have access to the bake command. And if you run bake list, it will give you a list of all commands which are available to you in your current project. Bake depends on a gem called console for logging. And the console gem provides two tasks, console info and console debug. These provide, they're really convenient tasks which just change the log level essentially for any subsequent command that's executed. So the first thing you might like to do is to add a command yourself. So let's go ahead and we're going to create a bake file. After much sort of thinking, I thought, I don't want to introduce new file extensions. I just want to go with the standard convention of .rb. And so Bake doesn't try and create any new file extensions, which basically means that it works out of the box with any text editor. So let's go ahead and we want to create a task. Let's call it bread. So we've got our task here called bread, and we're going to come back into here and go list. And we just see that inside the bakery we have a task called bread, and we can actually do that, and of course the task doesn't do anything, so let's make it do something. I like bread. Let's start with that. Excellent. So we can execute that task just by running bake bread. Now, one of the really important things is documentation. So right out of the box, when you put documentation on your methods, Bake will pick it up. So let's just write something. Bake a nice fresh loaf. So if we come back to baked list, you'll notice that it's picked up the documentation and shoved it under there. You can put as many lines as you want, and it will just format it for you. And so this is quite useful on bigger projects. So the next thing that I want to show is argument handling. So because this is a standard method, you might think, can I just give it standard arguments? And the answer is yes. There are a few little caveats, but generally speaking, it just works. So let's maybe let's pass in the type of bread. Now if we run baked list, it identifies that the type is a required argument. Now, if you're like me, Rake DB migrations create square brackets, the name of your migration, close square brackets. It's a really horrible way to pass arguments into a task. And so the way that Bake works is the arguments just sit on the command line, almost like a function call, but not quite like a function call. So if we want to pass in, I'm having a mind blank. What kind of bread do I want to make? A scone isn't really a bread, but it doesn't matter. Right, so we just throw it in there as an argument. Now, actually, I haven't even tested this. Once if I do that, yeah, it couldn't run it. That probably needs better error handling. Wrong number of arguments. The next interesting thing you can do is you can have optional arguments. So these are handled on the command line as well. So let's chuck in feeling, and we'll default to like. Yum, feeling type. Okay. So if you look here, you can see bread takes the type argument as before, but now we have this keyword argument which requires a slightly different syntax, and that's because it's optional. So we go bake, bread, scone, I am, yum, feeling equals love. Yum, I love scones. Oh well. Excellent. So this is kind of the basic structure of a task, and the nice thing to me is it's just a standard Ruby method. There's nothing really like complicated about it. You have to like look up the syntax or try and figure out how you're supposed to write the documentation or any of that stuff. But when I was looking at this, it's like everything is strings, and that kind of bothered me. So I thought, well, in the first instance, we can document what it is that we want. So type is definitely a string, but maybe let's change this to quantity. I am baking quantity. I am baking quantity type. Okay, right. Now, this is going to be a little bit of a, yeah, I didn't really think this through, but it's okay. I am baking 2 scone. Right, okay. But the problem with this is, let's say you wanted to do like ×2, you know, because you have friends coming. I'm making 22 scone. That doesn't seem right. What's going on there? Let's have a quick look at what quantity is. Okay, so we see that quantity is actually coming through as a string, which isn't quite what we want. So what we can do is we can declare it as an integer, the quantity to bake, and it didn't work. That's awesome. Let's try this. Undefined method 2. Awesome. I should have like checked this earlier. It did actually work though. It just like failed later on. So what's interesting is that oh no, it didn't work at all. Okay, debugging time. Let's have a quick look at, so bake is, I tried to keep the code as simple as possible, and there is a context implementation here, and this is where it calls methods. And the most interesting part for argument resolution is here. And this arguments is a list of strings, and this prepare method takes those strings and turns it into something which can be dispatched to the method. Essentially like an ordered list of arguments and a list of options. So what's going wrong? Let's just jump back to the example. So param quantity integer, let's just change that back to that. So typecasting. Let's double check that's not the problem. No. Okay, so what I do is this documentation line, we extract that and we figure out that it says integer here, and then we convert that argument from a string to an integer. So let's have a look at how that works. In here, this is where we get the optional parameters, and if we could find the type with the given name, we parse it. So let's jump into there and have a look at what's going on. I see the problem. Okay. Symbols and strings. Okay, great. Maybe that fixes the problem. Don't you love cut and paste errors? Okay, there we go. And back to our usual program. Right, so when we specify integer here, then when the user is putting a string on the command line, we'll parse it into an integer. And also, we report this in the documentation as well. I'm making two lists. So under here, we know that bread takes a type and a quantity, and the quantity is an integer. One of the things that I find quite tricky is that as your task library gets bigger and bigger, documentation tends to be the last thing you think of, especially what arguments it should take and how they should be formatted. It's pretty typical to have task libraries that read arguments from the environment, or read them from Rake's task argument structure. It's so complicated to use in practice that no one ever really seems to use it. They just use environment variables. So let's cover one more use case. So in here, we also support things like array of integer. Actually, to be honest, that doesn't really make sense anymore. So let's just make another task. So this bake file, this is private to the project, and these files are scoped at the top level of the project. So you'll notice that these ones here, they have a colon prefix. If we want to create tasks that will get exported, so say bakery was actually going to become a gem, and we wanted to add tasks that other gems could pick up. So let's have a quick look at the console gem, because we've seen the console has two tasks, and so let's see how that works. So in here, I have a bake directory, and in here I have a console.rb file, and this is essentially the contents here. It just has an info method and a debug method, and that invokes these methods respectively. And what you'll notice is I'm also requiring the code inside the method. One of the things that I've sort of tried to encode or design into Bake is minimizing the cost of executing tasks. And so I prefer to put requires inside the task just to avoid unnecessary code being loaded, which helps to keep it quick. Especially as these libraries get big, you really just don't want the user paying the cost of requiring all this code just to list or do one task. Right, so this is loaded on demand. When you type console : Bake will look through all your gems and try and find something which matches console.rb. There's one other pattern which you can use, but I won't go into that now. And so the benefit of this is that there is a canonical mapping of task to file structure. And this is also another issue I've had with Rake in the past, which is where basically your rake directory just turns into a giant I don't know, like a giant milkshake of every single ingredient you can imagine. So this structure is designed to try and keep that manageable and understandable by users that come and look at the code. So let's go ahead and make our own bake directory. And in here, my advice is to make a folder called bakery, or the file called bakery.rb. We'll just go, yeah, that was clever. So we can make tasks in here. So what can we do next? What kind of stuff does a bakery do? Sum up the money, because you've been selling lots of bread and you want to figure out how much money you've earned. And so amounts is an array of integers. Let's just call it, yeah. This isn't a real thing. And so we're going to write okay, so this is also recognized and parsed correctly, hopefully. We'll see. Maybe there's another bug. That'll be exciting. So what you'll see is it shows up here as a separate list of tasks. We now have a loader from this bake directory, which is in this project, and it says bakery sum money amounts. Amounts is an array of integer that amounts to sum. So let's go ahead and run that. Bakery sum money. I've never actually done this before. Unexpected end of input. Bake types 34. What have I done? I guess I'm inspiring everyone to the reliability of this software, but that's okay. Okay, let's kind of look at types, because it's kind of interesting. So this is, I think I'm going to pull this out of this gem, put it in a separate gem, because it doesn't really belong in here, but types RB line 34. I think I know what I did wrong. It's nothing to do with that. So, but let's talk about types anyway. So types is, at its core is just this eval statement. And it evals this type signature and a binding. And the binding is the module called types. And in types, there's a whole bunch of classes like class any. And then these methods like any, and then it takes arguments type. So it looks kind of like a class, but it's not. So then like this one is called array, and it takes an item type, and then it creates, this is not the Ruby standard lib array, this is this array class over here, which is like an abstract. It represents the type of an array, it takes an argument which is the type of the item, and then it has this method called parse, which basically takes the input, splits it by commas, and then maps it, and then uses the item type to parse the individual values. It could be better, but like it works, and it was half an hour to implement. So right, so let's go and have a look at this. And I stuffed up because I used like brackets when it should be like that, because it should be a method call. That's actually being executed as Ruby code. You could probably put Ruby code in there and do something really hilarious. But right, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, sum total is 15. So that's pretty neat. And if you want, you can make that like float. I haven't tested that either. Undefined method pass float. Oh yeah, I know what's happening there. Anyway, I'll fix that later. So one of the interesting things that you can do in here is that you can also, any data type that has a parse method can go in here. So if you put in, say, JSON, and I don't know, like, Probably going to kick myself writing JSON in the command line, but it's okay. And it's not amounts, it's items. Extra credit for good documentation. The items to list. Bake. List. Okay, so we can go bakery, inventory, items, items JSON, the items to list. So let's go bakery, inventory, and bread, water, flour, butter. Is that valid JSON? There we go. So bake is, I don't think it'll get much more complicated than this. I think this is really close to a 1.0 release. There's obviously some issues that probably need to be worked out, but generally speaking, you know, it's designed to be as simple as possible. You know, I wanted these methods to be pure Ruby. I wanted the documentation to be documentation. I didn't want any like special like DSL for all that stuff because we already have it. We don't need to like reinvent the wheel. Yeah, so you know, it's compatible with work side by side with Rake, but it's Bake. So you know, get baking. Excellent.